Hi, everybody. My name is Tristan Cabello, and welcome to the second event of the Master of Liberal Arts speaker series, which will last all semester during the fall semester. In this series, we will showcase the diversity of courses that our students can take in the program, and also the research that our faculty is doing. As you know, the Master of Liberal Arts is an interdisciplinary program, which means that you can take courses in disciplines such as music, literature, history, sociology. And you can also take courses, as you're going to see tonight, in religion with one of our professors, Dr. Chris Paris. Dr. Chris Paris teaches several courses in the Master of Liberal Arts. Among them, you'll find literary analysis of the Hebrew Bible, apocalyptic in the Bible, religion and popular culture, and another seminar entitled Religion or Politics, Politics of Religion. Chris has an MA, an MTS, and a PhD in religion from Vanderbilt University. He's the author of Narrative Obtrusion in the Hebrew Bible, and he has taught at several universities such as Johns Hopkins, Vanderbilt Divinity School, South University, and he was recently appointed visiting assistant professor at the University of San Diego. Chris will give a 30 to 35 minute presentation, and we will have a few minutes at the end for your questions. You can start typing your questions in the chat box. So Dr. Paris, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Dr. Cabello. It's great to be here. Enjoyed my time at Johns Hopkins and glad to be teaching, and what a wonderful program. And looking forward to sharing something with you this evening. We're talking about encountering religion in comic books and graphic novels. And what we're going to find tonight is some intentionality in these areas of that we definitely see religion there. And in other cases, we might not know that it's there, and it's kind of parallels my own experience. I didn't intend to get involved in this study, but I was doing a minor in Jewish studies at Vanderbilt University, and I was creating a course entitled Anti-Semitism in Modern America. And the more I studied anti-Semitism, the more I found that there were lots of Jewish artists and writers who could not find work in normal industries such as newspapers and magazines, and so they were kind of put in the kitty lit world of comics that people didn't really think might have been that important. Stan Lee's real name is Stanley Lieber. He and his brother were involved in the industry. We'll talk about Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster tonight. And we've got Bob Kane, the creator of Batman, Jack Kirby, the king of comics. All of these were Jews involved in the comic book industry. And we'll go a little bit further beyond Judaism. I've kind of taken my study into other religions. And in fact, in my world religions class that I'm currently teaching at the University of San Diego, we're on a weekly basis reading a comic and talking about it to learn about the founders of religions and other things. And here in advanced academic programs, I am using comics for example, in my Politics of Religion course, we read a two-set graphic novel series called Boxers and Saints that talks about the Boxer Rebellion, colonialism, Chinese religion, and Catholicism. In my course on apocalyptic and pop culture, we read Watchmen. And so you can find those things in the courses that I teach here. There will be some cases where we readily know that we're seeing religion in the comic book, and we might say, I understood that reference, like Captain America. He didn't get many references being someone out of time. And if you're sitting out there and thinking, well, I don't know, I'm not into comics, I've never read a graphic novel, that's been the experience of many students who've taken my classes. And I've got to say, it's been overwhelmingly positive that they've enjoyed reading the graphic novels, and just a different way to see religion. I find that in many cases when we're trying to describe religion, we're learning definitions, but do we truly know what we're talking about? And so I'm going to give some examples this evening, and then I'm going to talk about the origins of the comic book superhero and other figures, and get a little bit academic with it. It'll all be academic, but you'll definitely see how we'll try to take comics and make them academic. I've taught courses in popular culture, and my question to classes is always, should this be in a university? How can we do that? And we've overwhelmingly proven that it can. And so we'll look for origins. And I think we put in the description the true origins of comic books. That may have been more a little bit of the Stan Lee influence of saying it was the true origin, maybe not sound so academic. But I wanted to go over a few references that may be more obvious, because in my teaching, I will use the Gita. But how do we talk about a manifestation of a deity, particularly in Hinduism, when we have the incarnation, we have Krishna, who's the incarnation of Vishnu, and how do we show that he embodies all of the gods? And so this comic imagery does a good job of doing that. At the bottom, you can see the chariot, and in the story, Krishna is the charioteer for Arjuna, and then he reveals himself to Krishna because to Arjuna is wondering how does he know all of these things, and so he wants to see him. And if you've heard the George Harrison song, my sweet Lord, hallelujah, Hare Krishna, I really want to see you, that may be familiar. And if you've seen Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, they play the song when they go to Ego's planet, because Ego is actually an avatar of the planet. So that's here the obvious being a religion comic book, but many people have probably seen Guardians of the Galaxy, and not everyone would have realized that what reference was there, and might not have understood that reference. I like to use comics for comparative religion, particularly when talking about religions of India. We have lots of stories with founders, great leaders. Now we're talking about Jainism here. Jainism would say that the Mahavira was not really a founder, but we'll call him the leading figure, and Guru Nanak. And they oftentimes have stories where they are in touch with the natural world. And we see in the one panel of the Mahavira from Jainism that even the cobra is not afraid of him. And then in Guru Nanak from Sikhism, a cobra actually comes up and shades him with his hood. So what would be a dangerous thing becomes something, special and unique, and shows that he is a saint. And so that is a little bit of comparative religion that we can do with comics. And these are obviously designed to help people learn more about the religions. And then we have the story of Buddha. Deepak Chopra wrote a novel about Buddha, and then they created a comic series of the Buddha, and he wanted to add the adventure to his life and the mystery. In interviews, he talks about how that was important. And so we kind of see the genres blending, the religious founder, religious leaders life, but then blending into comic books. And one of the challenges that we sometimes face is, as everything explained, when people read a comic book, they may not understand everything, but it gives us a chance to explore things more fully. Because here we see Siddhartha before he becomes the Buddha. The Buddha is part of the warrior caste and is involved in that. And we have here examples talking about different realms. And if you don't know anything about Buddhism, you're not going to know about the realm of the hungry ghosts or what's really going on in the realm of people. And so whenever I teach the class, this gives me a good opportunity to talk about the wheel of life or becoming. That's what's being referenced in the comic. So this would be one of those, I know it's a comic about the Buddha, but what is really being said here? And so they're talking about different realms. Humans are in the best realm because they can achieve reincarnation, enlightenment, and get out of this cycle of reincarnation. And then you even have the gods over here. But Buddha is outside of all of that and pointing the way. And you've got the demon here who is controlling the wheel and everything. And so even though it's a religious story, oftentimes religious stories lend themselves to being part of a comic. In fact, I just read comics for fun, and I'm amazed at how many times I'm just doing it not to really be having fun. And I find, oh, there's another reference and there's another reference, and I feel that they must have gotten some religious text. They got the Bible, they got the Gita out, or they're doing something. And so that allows me to tell my wife that when I'm reading a comic book, I'm researching. I'm not just goofing off here. So keep that in mind. And then what about those that are definitely maybe no one will notice that it's not a comic that's devoted to religion, but there's something in there if you know something about religion that's going on. And do you get that reference? Are you like Captain America? Do you get it? Do you not? And so this is from the comic Wolverine First Class, and it features Shang-Chi, who was recently, the character was in the movie Shang-Chi and the Ten Rings. Really great movie, wonderful to see Chinese history and mythology represented in the movie, and Marvel did a great job of updating the character and everything that was going on. But we have something interesting that happens in the comic. Wolverine comes to Shang-Chi because Kitty Pryde has been kidnapped by his old enemy Sabretooth, and whenever he fights Sabretooth, he becomes more like an animal. He can't control himself. And so he wants Shang-Chi to teach him a new fighting technique, but instead Shang-Chi takes out an apple and says, "What is this? What is this?" And to the casual observer, not knowing, they might not realize this is a religious thing. And so Shang-Chi says, "If you say it's an apple, I'll hit you 30 times. If you say it's not an apple, I'm going to hit you 30 times. And of course, Wolverine's like, "You'll try." And what's really going on here in the comic is this is a Buddhist meditation known as a koan, where you try to get rid of your own thoughts. And so you think of a question. And one of the big examples that's given in Buddhism is, what is the sound of one hand clapping? And if you can meditate on that, that's going to rid you of normal logical ways of thinking. And that's what's going on here. Shang-Chi is trying to get Wolverine to think differently. And he tells Wolverine that he says, "I've got a diamond sword and it cuts through everything." And he's not actually carrying a sword, but he's talking about, getting rid of his thoughts. And so you read the comic and Wolverine doesn't get it at first, but as he moves on, he starts to understand more fully what Shang-Chi is telling him. And so that is an example of a koan which would not be readily understood, and many people would just read it and think, "Oh, Shang-Chi is just a kung fu master," and they would not think of him as a Buddhist master necessarily. And then we talked at the beginning that my interest started with Judaism, and it's interesting to see Hebrew quoted in a comic. And here is the thing, and he's gone back to the old neighborhood. Jack Kirby, with Stan Lee, created the Fantastic Four, and many people say that the thing was based off of him. And we find out in the comic that the thing is Jewish. This wasn't revealed until about the 1990s. And this old man in the neighborhood who's gotten hurt as the thing was fighting someone, until the old man asked him, he says, "Why didn't you tell people that you were Jewish?" And he says, "Well, I figure so many people think we're monsters that I didn't want to make us look bad by me being a monster." And I think that in many ways reflects what comic book artists and writers were dealing with, anti-Semitism. And here you see Hebrew entering the comic. He's quoting the Shema, Deuteronomy 6:4, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one Lord," and the monotheism that we see in Judaism. These are all examples, and we could do multiple other religions. From Batman, there's the Muslim superhero Night Runner or Dust from X-Men, and we find numerous heroes from religion, and this has kind of been a fascination of mine to study. And now let's try to make it academic, though. Hopefully it's not completely unacademic, but one of my favorite books to study comparative religion is by Wendy Doniger, The Implied Spider: Politics and Theology and Myth. And someone once told me that teaching is the search for the perfect metaphor. We're trying to search for the perfect metaphor to figure out things. And I think it's a good way to look at what we're doing here at advanced academic programs. How can we help each other understand? And so Doniger, in the book, The Implied Spider, quotes someone else who says, "I see webs everywhere, but never the spider at work." And that's oftentimes what we find in the study of religion. There are a lot of similarities between religions. And when we do comparative religion, we want to respect the similarities, but we also want to respect the differences. There was a move early on in the study of religion to say, "Oh, that we're all the same," for the purposes of inclusivism, which I think the motives were great there, but it wasn't appreciating the diversity was there. So Doniger offers that this is a useful metaphor, the implied spider, for the comparativist if we aspire to be the shared humanity, the shared life experience that supplies the web-building material, the raw material of narrative to countless human web makers. And that would be the problem, though. It's a great metaphor, but we can never find the spider, and a lot of people want to find the spider, but we need to appreciate the webs. And for those in psychology, a little bit Jungian, collective consciousness. She goes on to say, I argue that we must believe in the existence of the spider, the experience behind the myth. Though it is indeed true that we can never see this sort of spider at work, we can only find the webs, the myths that human authors weave. So that's kind of what I think we're doing here at advanced academic programs. No matter what subject that we're studying, we're seeing a lot of the webs and how are they connected and what's working on. And it works particularly well for religion because it's really difficult to find origins, and there are a lot of webs because we have syncretism where things are becoming amalgamated in religion, taking parts of culture and different religions and ideologies and philosophies. But I did want to try to trace some of the origins of superheroes and go back. So the origin that I see is the golem. Many people have said from Jewish lore could be the origin of comic book superheroes, and not only them, but we'll talk about others that are a possibility. And the story of the golem, and even in children's books, and you'll notice that the figure here sort of it's a rabbi, but sort of looks like a mad scientist. The story of the golem is that the Jews are being persecuted in Prague, and they can't really fight back. They don't have the power to do that, and they need a champion. And who's going to be the champion that will protect them? And so we actually get the word golem from the Hebrew here. Here's the word golmi in Psalm 139:16, talk about being a shapeless mass and being created. And so this is where the word golem comes from. And then the story, interesting here, an old record cover, Leonard Nimoy, who was Jewish, as well as William Shatner, both Ukrainian Jews, who talks about the story of the golem, where the Maharal, the rabbi, goes down to the riverside, and much like God created Adam out of the dust of the earth, begins to shape and fashion this creature that will continue to grow. And some men go with him, and the purpose of the golem is to defend the Jewish community. And so they are creating the golem here. But how do you bring the golem to life? If it's mud, if it's nothing, how do you bring it to life? Well, this is where the importance of the word comes in Judaism, the power of words. And we see the end of Genesis 2:3b. It ends with the words bara Elohim la'asot, talking about, God has created everything. And at the very end of creation, many scholars will say that, the first creation story, there are actually two, ends at Genesis 2:3b. And this verse has the first letter of the Hebrew alphabet, Aleph. It has Mem, the middle letter of the Hebrew alphabet, and it has Tav, the last letter of the Hebrew alphabet. And so from that, they deduced that creation required words, and it would spell the word emet, which means truth. And so truth is part of the creative process. You've got to have, in truth, here being defined as having the beginning, the middle, and the end. This is the collective where we get truth. And so to bring the golem to life, you have to inscribe a word on its head. And why not inscribe the word truth if that was the essential part of creation? And so the golem is brought to life here, and you see different representations. This one definitely looking more wooden. And you see it's not always have to be spelled in Hebrew. It's spelled emet, which is truth. And the golem is being brought to life to defend it. And it's a creature, and it's controlled by the rabbi. And when it's not out defending the Jewish people, it is doing chores in the synagogue. And you can even see other words could be used. This particular one has chai for life. So the golem is brought to life. So use the word life, and it represents the power of words. And I think comics are an interesting part of Judaism and that Jewish history because it's been a religion that did not depict God, but its story has always been depicted in the power of words. So the power of words and images come together in comics. And Elie Wiesel, Holocaust survivor, author of Night, says the golem is the most fascinating creature in Jewish lore and history. A creature that is meant to defend, that can be created, that can be brought to life by the power of the word, and particularly those Hebrew words, whether it be emet or chai. This golem comes to life, much like Adam, and defends the Jewish people. And thinking about the time that it's done, you can see sometimes that there seems to be a little bit of alchemy going on there, sorcerer's apprentice type thing, that the rabbi does not simply look, as you saw in some of those scenes, like a rabbi, but we'll see even more sort of a mad scientist as well. So I think we're getting a little bit of that. And when you look at here, the rabbi who is creating the golem, it's kind of got sort of the mad scientist look, even though he's a rabbi. And so this was the film, and it was 1920, the horror masterpiece. And you can definitely see this connection here to Frankenstein, and we'll talk momentarily about that. But you see this kind of misunderstood monster in the figure of the golem that is created, and there's Frankenstein. And is there a connection between Mary Shelley's Frankenstein and the golem? Well, Bertman argues that it's no mere coincidence. He says the golem's introduction into early 19th century German literature, ironically here, at the hands of two avowed anti-Semites, Jacob Grimm and Ludwig Achim von Arnim, may have permitted its rediscovery by Mary Shelley. In addition, the torture journey of the creature in her novel may have been inspired by her reading of her husband's poems about the Wandering Jew. So we can create a direct connection from the golem to Frankenstein. We're trying to find the webs of the spider. So we go from Jewish lore to the golem to Frankenstein. Can we find any other webs? And maybe we're not really finding the spider, but there could be other webs that are there. And so the golem has spawns. Some of them are monstrous, some of them are heroic. Frankenstein would be our first spawn of the golem, and we want to see, well, what about superheroes? Do they fit into this as well? We can look back, though, before we get to superheroes. Well, what about something else that many people have seen? No Mickey Mouse tale. This is talking about the influence on Fantasia that Goethe learned about the golem in a visit to the Prague Jewish ghetto. And he talked about the golem, and then a symphonic poem was based on that, and that got the Sorcerer's Apprentice. And so we get Mickey Mouse's Fantasia, where much like the golem, when he was not defending the synagogue and defending the Jewish citizens of Prague, was working, and Mickey Mouse and Fantasia here. And of course, Disney owns Marvel, so it's all connected some way. So we're figuring out all these spider webs, perhaps untangling them a little bit, or maybe showing how they're all tangled up even more in these origin stories. But what about the golem? Well, Will Eisner, who is considered the father of the graphic novel, says the golem was very much the precursor of the superhero. The idea that we can have a defender, someone who creates something to defend people. And here, ironically, you have Action Comics, and then you have a later comic of the golem mimicking that. But it kind of goes both ways. Where does it really begin? You could say, well, they're copying Superman, but if Superman was copying the golem, then, well, where is the origin story? And I think that goes back to Doniger's points. And Will Eisner, I should also say, wrote Tenement Stories. He wrote The Spirit, and he is well known for A Contract with God, which is an interesting question about theodicy. What do you do in the midst of suffering? Highly recommend reading that. We can look to Jewish historians, and those some great books that I can share here. Ari Kaplan's From Krakow to Krypton, Jews and Comic Books. Many people have written about this and try to show where these origins come down. So Superman and the Golem, Kaplan tells us, Superman actualized the adolescent power fantasies of these two Depression-era kids, being Siegel and Schuster, who craved a muscle-bound redeemer to liberate them from the social and economic impoverishment of their lives and into the tradition of the Golem of Prague to fight anti-Semites. And there's kind of an interesting story with Jerry Siegel in particular, that his father was a tailor in Cleveland, Ohio. They were Jewish immigrants, and his father was actually killed by some robbers. And ironically, he did not come up with the story of Batman, but Superman instead. But you can see the desire for a golem-like creature was in his mind. And so Siegel and Schuster were Jewish immigrants, and so we have the book here disguised as Clark Kent, Jews, Comics, and the Creation of the Superhero. You see he has high life on him. And this is much the persona, the Clark Kent persona, who he's trying to fit in, even though he's a superhero. He has a nebbish persona, which in Yiddish would mean someone who kind of is a clumsy, klutzy, acts like a nerd. Similarly, Peter Parker will be that type of person as well. Think of Stan Lee and that influence. Stan Lee has been asked, he's the late great Stan Lee now, asked, what did your Judaism and Jewish upbringing defend? You know, did that influence your comic book writing? He says he doesn't know that it directly did, but as many people study it, it seems like it probably did. And here we have Siegel and Schuster was said to have started drawing the first comic of Superman on his mother's challah board, where she made the challah bread for Shabbat dinner. And then we have perhaps the best title ever, Up, Up, and Oy Vey, how Jewish history, culture, and values shaped the comic book superhero. And so there's a lot of connections there. And I will say it's a very good book. One of the challenges, though, academically, we have to ask is if some people are going too far in making connections, that we see connections where they aren't. So just as we're trying to, see the web of the implied spider, some people might like to make new webs that don't exactly go places, and sometimes Simcha Weinstein is guilty of that in this book, but a fine book to read. And then we have the connection between Hebrew and Kal-El, or Superman. Hello, my name is Kal-El. This is in Hebrew. Kal-El in Hebrew could mean all that is God, as in someone who has godlike powers. It could mean swift God, as in faster than a speeding bullet, because it has that word El in it for God. People have tried to figure out what it is. And some people have said, well, wait a minute, Jerry Siegel created him. So he's actually putting his name in there. And Siegel was the grandfather of Clark Kent's Superman, Kal-El, in the short-lived TV series Krypton. But where did it all come about? Well, we can trace it back to Moses. Many people say, well, Superman is a Christ figure, and we'll talk about that momentarily. But here we see what Robert Alter, who is a Jewish scholar, would call a type scene. A child is put in a vessel, set adrift, it's found by an adopted parent. We see the first part on Krypton. We see the next part, whether it is the Pharaoh's daughter finding Moses, or Jonathan and Martha Kent finding Kal-El and naming him Clark and raising him. That story repeats over and over. And in fact, it's also the story of Sargon of Akkad, Karna, the hero of the Mahabharata. We had something similar with Ramus and the Remus, of children in baskets, that we could talk a lot more about, but we just don't really have time. And some people would say, well, this is interesting. This is, you've tried to make it academic, but are comics great literature? I think that they are. And this is why I say that they are. New 52, New Origins, as Lara, Superman's mother, is letting him go as Krypton's about to explode in its apocalypse. Now I'm going to tell you some lies. She tells him, I'm going to pray that they're true. She's praying that her son will survive. And so then the story shifts to Martha Kent finding the baby. And she says, I kiss your forehead and I taste salt. Someone wept over you. Someone loved you. Two mothers across time and space, vast space, meet in this child. And that's one of the most beautiful things of anything I've ever read. And I think it is simply amazing. So I think comic books can be great literature. Now, we did say there was some Christ-like imagery, Christ imagery. Originally, they thought of naming Martha Kent Mary. They chose not to. But in the 1978 movie Superman is where we get a lot of this imagery, because Richard Donner, who was responsible for the film, tried to add all of these things. He was Star Child. Superman was Star Child. His ship looked like the Star of Bethlehem. And there's a line in the movie, they can be a great people, Kal-El, if they wish to be. But I'm sending you, my only son. And so you get that Christian imagery there. That's added much later. And then there are other golems besides Superman. The Hulk himself is a golem, a misunderstood monster. And here he's actually in the shadow of a golem. So the golem becomes a figure that these heroes fight. And then you have Superman in the shadow of the galactic golem. And he's really in the shadow of the golem because that can be his origin story. And we have some stories that are just taking the golem literally in Breath of Bones, The Tale of the Golem. There is a Jewish community in World War II, and the Germans are going to attack them. And so this boy creates a golem and brings it to life. And so I think we're constantly creating golems to protect us. And then there's the question of, if we create something to protect us, what if it goes too far? And we can see this in political things and lots of things. Well, at the time, it seemed that we needed this. Do we still need it? And that's what happened with the Golem of Prague, that finally the people of Prague said, we're tired of the Golem beating us up, and we want to make peace. And when they made peace, the Golem had to be taken care of. And so it's once again the power of words. The word emet, if you erase the first letter, you get met, death. And so that brought the Golem's life to an end, and something that was good was created, but it only had a limited time that it needed to be there. And then we find other webs for the Golem, that it's not just the Golem, but it's Frankenstein, it's zombies, it is cyborgs. We can all see these as golems of that web continuing from, even earlier maybe than the original story of the Golem. Maybe there's something that precedes that, because it's difficult to find origins, but we see constant things being added. And so, popular franchises like The Walking Dead probably owe something to the Golem as well. And maybe even Star Wars and Darth Vader, because we see the Golem statue in Prague and we see Darth Vader and they look awfully similar. So we could keep finding these things. And then I also wanted to talk about, since we did the implied spider, as we're getting close to our close here, of these connections and bringing Spider-Man. And Spider-Man has done a wonderful job of having the Spider-Verse and different versions of characters. And here we have Spider-Man India, who he's very similar. And of course, unfortunately, people were criticizing, well, Spider-Man can't be from India or be a Hindu. And Peter Parker tells Peter Pravakar, who has an Uncle Ben and a lot of things just like him, that each Spider-Man or Spider-Woman or Spider-Person has their own uniqueness. And I think this speaks to the fact that we can have superheroes from any community. And I think this is a wonderful thing. And that's the legend of the Golem. Well, this include the inclusivism, of course, it started off with anti-Semitism. So superheroes, there shouldn't be anything that's uninclusive, saying, well, someone can't be a superhero because they don't fit X paradigm or race or gender or whatever, fill in the blank. So I wanted to bring that in. And then finally, to close, there are actually golems in comic books. Batman fights the Golem of Gotham. And there's a Jewish man who creates the Golem, and he's seeing neo-Nazis with a swastika, and it comes back around because they are attacking the Hindu temple, and so the Jewish man is trying to stop them there. And so to be continued. There's lots more that we could say about the Golem, but my time is up, and I'm looking forward to answering your questions about the Golem.
Chris, thank you so much. That was really great. I learned a lot, and I'm sure the attendees did too. So if you have questions, I'm speaking to the attendees. If you have questions, please make sure that you post your question in the chat box. And in the meantime, I think this is a great example of what we do in the MLA program, because it is truly an interdisciplinary course. It is truly an interdisciplinary presentation, that you just did, mixing religion, religious studies, history, Jewish studies, popular culture studies. And so this is really precisely what we do in the Master of Liberal Arts. In many ways, it reminded me of a course that I teach on Michael Jackson. Michael Jackson actually had a whole album in 1992 called Dangerous, where the whole album is actually filled with references to the Bible and to the Jehovah's Witness religion. And so this is really the type of work that we try to do here, try to debunk, deconstruct popular culture, the world around us with all those references. One question to you, Chris. You mentioned that one scene where this Jewish guy, says that he didn't want to say that he was Jewish because everybody thinks that we monster, right? And so he doesn't say that he's Jewish. And so that reflects, of course, all the anti-Semitic discourses that fills nowadays world. You don't talk too much about Islam in your presentation. Like, have you encountered, any references to Islam in your work?
Yeah, that's a great question. One book is called Veiled Superheroes, and a professor from Western Kentucky, that's where I did my undergrad. and she writes about female superheroes. Miss Marvel is one of the most popular Muslim superheroes, and what's great about Miss Marvel, and I love to talk about that, is that it's a wonderful job in the comic written by a Muslim woman, but what they do is she's not just a Muslim, but she's a teenager growing up who has friends, and she's working with the Avengers, and it's really this holistic portrait of her life, which is what I think is one of the best things about it. Highly recommend that you read it. There's a Night Runner from Batman who he's in France, and it's really helps him to dress up as part of Batman Incorporated. Bruce Wayne comes out and says, I've funded Batman for years, and now I want to fund other people. And so Night Runner is there. And of course, Dust is an ex-woman, I guess I should say. And she wears the veil, and she can turn into dust. And you see one scene, she's like, "Forgive me, Allah, for the people I may hurt."
Okay.
But there's wonderful images.
Chris, we have a few questions from the attendees here. Carlos is asking, could you speak more on the death of Superman and the Dark Knight trilogy and the Golem's probable influence?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. First of all, the death of Superman is just an interesting way that a pop culture icon figure, whatever we want to call him, becomes larger than life. But what was happening leading up to the death of Superman is that many people were saying, a Superman is your grandpa's superhero. He's the big blue Boy Scout. We like Batman. We like the Punisher. We like the people who are the fighters, and we don't think Superman works in the world that we have today. And so I don't know that there was a direct influence on the Golem there, but what was fascinating is that when Superman died, people bought the comic. I mean, you knew he was going to come back to life at some point. Have a friend who owned a comic shop at the time. He's interviewed by CNN. It becomes this big news item. People are wearing those black bands around their arms to mourn Superman. And so I think that was highly significant. Now, definitely the Dark Knight, the Dark Knight trilogy, I see a lot of the Golem's influence because Bruce Wayne gives Lucius Fox, I've got this thing where I've got way too much power here. I need you to destroy it, but I'm going to use it now to find the Joker. I think that is probably the most direct evidence of the Golem right there.
Alisa has another question for you, Chris. Professor Paris, are there comic books that portray Jesus or other people in the Bible as superheroes?
Yeah, interestingly enough, Superman actually has Samson. There's All-Star Superman. He faces off against Samson and against Hercules. And so you have the literal figure coming there. Some people have written comics of what if there were to be a child born that people thought was like Jesus. I think that one's called American Jesus. There are a couple of volumes. I read the first one. So that's interesting. There are also comic Bibles that are becoming very popular. The Action Bible is one of them. And I think you could probably see a lot of that. And of course, there's just Christ figures in comics quite a bit.
One question that I wanted to ask you, you mentioned something during the presentation about we always we hope that we're not reading too much into what we see, and as researchers, as academics, of course, this is always a problem. Are we actually seeing too much? And I know that this is a question that always comes back in all the research method courses that I teach. How do you handle that question? How do you make sure that you're not reading too much into a comic book? And I don't think you are at all, but this is really a question that students struggle with most of the time.
Yeah, I think that's a wonderful question. And one of my professors of New Testament, when I was undergrad, warned us about parallelomania, which I think we all can, find the dangers of parallelomania. And when I was talking about Up, Up, and Away Bay, that author is a good author. I enjoy the book, but he'll do simple things like Batman lives the Bat cave is in the Bat cave, and Jesus came out of a cave when he resurrected. Well, those two things aren't really related or have anything to do with each other. So I think once we find something that could be a potential connection, we'd have to ask ourselves, does this really work? Or is this just, two things that are coincidental?
Yeah. I mean, I'm struggling with that too. And I think we all do.
But we should always go for it and see if it works.
Yeah, absolutely. We should always test the hypothesis, right?
Yeah.
Another question from the audience here for you, Chris. Could you please talk about Golem post-pandemic? Are you seeing any shifts in terms of how Golem is manifested in post-pandemic pop culture? And if so, what does it say about emerging fears and aspirations for the decade and of the 2020s?
And that is a wonderful question. I don't know that I know necessarily now
It may be a bit
post-pandemic.
too soon.
Yeah, but I do have an answer to that. And I would say that it comes in one of the spawns of the golem, the zombie. Oddly enough, I got invited to do a talk on zombies at Nashville Public Library, and then they invited me from that talk to the local Rotary Club, and they made a donation in my name to stop polio. So by talking about a fake disease, I helped cure a real one.
Okay.
But so that is a little bit of that. But what I do think is when we look at zombies, the Walking Dead phenomenon, zombies are very popular right now. And you ask yourself why. I think one of the reasons is that zombies are mindless. And so when you create a zombie, you don't have to be worried about offending someone in our culture, because it's really easy. Whether you're, obviously some people are intending to offend, some people are maybe, I just created the character. I know, like we have the new James Bond movie out, and Rami Malek is in it. And he said, I'll play the villain, but he can't have any connection to religion, or I won't do the role. So I feel like it's a challenge for many people who are writing or producing or directing something to not even unintentionally show something. So I think zombies answer that question. I think maybe we will be, we are balancing precariously on cures and what is acceptable for us to require of people. There are a lot of debates going on, which I'm not going to get involved in, but maybe that is also a question about the golem. I mean, how much is too much? When I was saying that, I'm thinking of the Patriot Act. When the Patriot Act came out, some people said this is necessary, but then people are like, at what point? Once you put something in law, can you dial it back? Is there a way to get rid of it?
Yeah. Maybe one last question before we finish here. Most of the work here that you have, most of the comic books that you're exploring, I think, are US based. I mean, those are written mostly by American writers. Do you plan on exploring, comic books outside of the US? I mean, maybe it would provide, maybe there would be like a comparative study to be done here. I don't know. Is there any plans to do that?
I mean, I think that's a wonderful idea. Some of the earlier ones are obviously from India, and so those are the more. And it's interesting. We're getting the children of immigrants writing, like Gene Rang, who did Boxers and Saints that I use in my class. He also wrote American-born Chinese. I do go back to Islam. Persepolis is a wonderful one that I would add, that I've never taught on that, but I want to add. It's about a woman growing up. I think she grows up in Iran, and she's dealing with her culture, and it's kind of fascinating because she sees the control. She's sees the control of Islam, and then she goes to France and sees the control of Catholicism. And it's an interesting commentary that she has on both religions. So I think Persepolis is the #1 place where I would start, and then I would move from there. But that's what I'm wanting to do. I've oftentimes wanted to get involved in, anime comics, but at some point I'm like, you have to rein it in. I would read everything if I could.
And there's so much we can do, right? So, yes. Chris, I wanted to thank you for this amazing talk tonight. We learned really so much, and I now also, because it's the first time I actually see you live, I understand why students love taking your courses so much. So thank you so much for this presentation. It was great. And I just want to tell the attendees before we wrap up here that we are having this series during the whole fall semester, and our next event is actually a presentation on environmental studies, on ecology studies, and it will be by the MLA faculty Eglute Trinkoskaite, and she will present on soul, breath, and wind in the Lithuanian context. And this is scheduled for October 19th, so this is next week at 6 p.m. Eastern Time. Thank you so much all for joining, and have a wonderful evening. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.